weren't charged with the crime of X doesn't mean they committed the crime of X either,
I'm not
Destiny.
making that argument. You're using this argument as a way to negate my argument. Just because I'm not making
it's called a counter argument. Yes.
No, hold on.
Destiny walks straight into a logic trap, and Andrew just lets him flounder. Anyone familiar with reasoning can see the problem, but bias makes it easy to miss. Once you see it, though, you can't unsee it. Destiny struggles to separate a riot from an insurrection. He insists they're different, but his own criteria for insurrection also fit a riot, and vice versa. Andrew isn't adding anything, he's just holding up a mirror. The result? A circular exchange where Destiny keeps repeating his criteria but never manages to draw a clear line. Keep these points in mind as we continue with the video.
Insurrection better than some other thing. And you would have to make it refutable to that thing from what people were charged under. So if the criteria is, I'm going to give you what I think an insurrection is, and it fits a different criteria better than an insurrection, and under that criteria, that's what people were basically charged under, then it sounds like the other thing makes more sense than an insurrection.
So we're going with the argument
totally
that for
X
event to have happened, like some person needs to have been charged with the crime?
No, your logic there is faulty.
Then
as well.
why do you have the second element there for me proving?
Let me respond.
Hold on, you can't just talk for 20 minutes and then as soon as I say one sentence, you ramble for another 20 minutes.
You can't ask me a question and then move to another question.
I can ask you a question and then ask another question as part of my question. I'm able to do that.
Yeah, but I wasn't even able to respond.
You gave two elements to what I needed to prove. The second one was that I have to show why people weren't charged with a crime. I've answered this thing 50 million times. We can center on just as one point if you want. Just because somebody hasn't been charged with the crime of X doesn't mean that an event related to X didn't occur. This is true of
but the opposite would equally be true. The opposite is also true. Just because they weren't charged with the crime of X doesn't mean they committed the crime of X either,
I'm not
Destiny.
making that argument. You're using this argument as a way to negate my argument. Just because I'm not making
it's called a counter argument. Yes.
No, hold on. That would be like you saying John couldn't have murdered Jane because John wasn't there, and then I say, well, no, that's not true, and then you going, well, just because John was there doesn't mean that he murdered Jane.
Nope,
that's
the
not
opposite.
The element that I'm giving.
Nope, the opposite is true.
I've given you four clear things.
Wait. No, wait. Hang on. The opposite is true.
Argument that, or give me a definition of insurrection, or do you think it's an
Stop.
thing?
Hang on. The opposite is true. I'm not saying that. So you say, oh, John murdered Jane, but that can't be true because he also may not have murdered Jane. You're making the claim John murdered Jane. And so I say, okay, that's your claim that he murdered Jane. Can you define for me what the criteria would be in which you would consider this to be murder? And you go, well, and then you define for me something that is not murder or fits some other criteria better. Would not a rational human being, including you, take that and understand, wait, if it fits this other criteria better, it probably isn't actually murder?
What part of my... Can you give me an example? I'm just curious, and I shouldn't even engage with this so just up to this point, you've given me no definition of insurrection. You seem unwilling to commit to a single definition.
It's not my burden.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just saying you've given me no definition of insurrection. You seem unwilling to do so. So then my question would be, can you give me a riot? Can you give me a riot that would fit all 4 points that I've given of what I've defined as insurrection? Well, then you must accept my definition of insurrection.
I don't need to accept. Why would I need to accept your definition?
Because you're saying that my definition of insurrection isn't valid because it also applies to riots, and I'm telling you very clearly, no, it doesn't, because riots don't typically happen in a planned manner to contravene the execution of some government function or the implementation of some particular law.
That's not what your definition says. Your definition says under point 2,
resisting some law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Correct.
Yeah, so you're just changing your definition.
I'm not resisting. Do you think that resisting a law is the same thing as breaking a law?
I think that it could be synonymous inside of people's minds, but no, I could see the distinction with merit. But when you say resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding, that sure sounds like a riot to me, Destiny.
Okay, can you give me an example of a riot where that happens?
Where BLM burned down a police station. That seems like it's resisting the law.
Yeah, so that's what law were they resisting the implementation of? What law were they resisting?
The law of arson, the law of rioting, all sorts of laws.
So you're telling me that those riots were trying to make it so that arson was legal? Can you point me to a tweet? Can you point me to a statement where somebody was saying we're rioting because we think that the laws against arson are illegal? Wait a second.
Can you show me in your definition where it says that the purpose of the insurrection is so that they can make something else legal? Because that's nowhere in your definition, doesn't it?
Resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding.
It doesn't say anything about making something else legal. You just made it up.
No, you're saying that they're resisting the law of arson. Nobody's arguing that the law of arson is bad. Just because you're breaking a law doesn't mean you're resisting the law.
What's the or?
The or for what?
3 minutes?
It says, or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Would you not consider if somebody interfered with the FBI, for instance, for that to be interfering with the course of a government proceeding? Or if somebody interfered with police officers, that would be interfering with the course of a government
Police
proceeding?
officers are not federal police officers.
They
If you
don't-
want to
but
talk about
federal-
interfering with,
federal's
if you
not
want to talk
required.
about, if you want to, where you are, because we're talking about January
It's
6th.
not. We have your definition. It's not
Where did
required.
January 6th happen?
But it does. We have your definition.
Why would I be
Destiny.
arguing about the definition of an insurrection in a state when we're talking about an insurrection that happened
Well,
on the
then
Capitol
can you
grounds?
show me in your definition where it says it must be federal? For
I don't
an
need
insurrection
to. We're talking
occur?
about an insurrection that
then
occurred
if
on
it
federal
doesn't-
grounds.
It doesn't matter. So then any of the criteria which would apply at the state level would still apply at the federal level for rioting. It's the
I
same
don't know
thing.
if insurrections are state defined. I'm not aware of that in the historical record. Can you
Well, you
point
can't
somewhere
have a
where you
state
can
insurrection. Why
I'm not
couldn't
aware
you?
of some. Can you show me where in the historical record where that's ever
I'm
been
just
stated?
asking why you couldn't have one.
Because I'm not aware of any having occurred historically.
That doesn't mean you couldn't have one.
You just claimed that it's
I
possible.
didn't make a claim.
Oh, okay. Then we're not. No one is claiming here that an insurrection in a state is
No,
possible.
you
Okay,
are
cool.
making
Gotcha.
a claim.
All right.
You're making a claim
I'm
on
making
your
a
4
positive
points.
claim that there could be a federal insurrection
right.
because I have a historical record of there being statements about insurrections federally and historically. I've never had a statement about a state insurrection. I'm not aware of any of those. If you are
Yeah,
aware
but
of one
you
of those,
not
feel free
being
to tell
aware
me.
of any doesn't mean that the criteria could not apply to a state insurrection, correct?
That's correct, but we are talking
Yeah,
about
that's
an
correct.
insurrection that happened on federal grounds, so we're obviously
Yeah,
talking
I
about
agree,
federal
but your
insurrections.
definition doesn't require federal anything. That's
Okay,
not what
so
your
we have
definition
no-
requires.
Okay, I think if this is if the only holdout you have is that your definition of resisting a particular law just means that you are breaking a law, then I think I'm satisfied at ending it.
No, it's not. Or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. This could be localized or
It
non-localized.
can't be. No one here has made any claims
Yeah, it
about
can
a
be.
non-federal insurrection. Okay, well, if those are your two holdouts that you think
Well, okay.
resisting
Well,
a law
what
is
does
the same as breaking a law,
or
or that
interfering with the
course
course of a government proceeding mean? What does that mean?
The record that I'm invoking, we're especially talking about things relating to insurrection, and we're talking about the invocation of insurrection, which is my understanding has only ever happened in federal law and in stuff relating to the United States government, not a state government. If you want to show me it happening, or show me a historical record, or a state constitution, or a state criminal statute that references insurrection, then we can talk about that if you want to. But
What
we're
does
arguing
or
about-
interfering with the course of a government proceeding mean, Destiny?
or interfering with the course of the implementation or the execution
30
of some
seconds.
particular federal law?
It has to be federal?
Yes, because we're talking about the federal government. We're
No,
talking about
that doesn't mean it.
insurrection.
Hang on.
Yeah.
So you're doing a classic kind of Destiny bait and switch, where you say in this particular case it would, because that's what we're talking about. Okay, that's fair, but that doesn't mean that that's what the definition says. The definition itself does not say that it must be federal.
Who-
It
you don't
doesn't
even
say
agree
that.
with my what
Hang on.
definition are you even
It
referring to
doesn't
here?
say that anywhere. What does or interfering with the course of a government proceeding
10 minutes?
mean? What does it mean?